Don't make these 5 debt mistakes. There's no such thing as good debt and bad debt. Use loans or pay them off? Well, know these 5 things first. Let me give you a bit of a preview. We got to define debt. Most people have it totally confused, and because of that, it's costing them. We're going to teach you the cash flow index so you know which loans to attack first and what priority, when it makes sense to refinance. We're going to help you understand what's called cost of money, which is the key factor in how to handle loans and understanding how we always pay interest. And we're going to understand the 4 C's to minimize costs. So look, here's the fast money tips. Money, love, and momentum. So there's 3 R's when it comes to loans. We either restructure, reallocate, or renegotiate. Restructure is maybe you have a high interest rate loan and you have something else that's a better asset. You could borrow from cash value of life insurance, borrow from a qualified plan, or refinance a paid off car and get an amortized loan that actually improves your credit score and pay off a higher interest rate loan, getting a much more manageable payment that actually helps you instead of hurts you. So that's when you consider restructuring. Reallocation could be maybe you have underperforming assets. You have money that's just sitting there doing nothing. Maybe even a certificate of deposit. You can get a loan against that and then pay off a higher interest rate loan, right? And now because you have collateral like a CD or cash value of insurance, that's going to help you reallocate. Or if you just have underperforming assets that you can cash out and pay off a loan, that's a guaranteed savings if the loan interest rate is higher. And finally, the last of the R's is renegotiate. I learned this tactic because I was moving from my apartment to my first house. And as I was moving, I was calling to cancel things. And back in those days, it was cable. And they just started saying, well, before you cancel, what if we gave you this price? Because I didn't say I was moving. I just called to cancel. And I just kept saying, I don't know. And then I got it cut basically in half and then just transferred it to the new property. The same thing I thought might be able to work with credit cards. And so I just called my credit card company. I said, I'm thinking about doing a balance transfer or canceling this card. And they moved me to the retention department. I was able to lower my interest rate because I'd always paid on time. I had a good credit score, and they wanted to keep me as a customer. And so there was even ways to do that with mortgages back in the day where you could just get like a modification, and not like a modification where you're in trouble, but there were times where interest rates changed so much you could refinance without full closing cost. They would do like a drive-by appraisal versus a full appraisal. You didn't have all those expenses simply because of the change in interest rate. So that's a time, it's kind of like a renegotiation because you're staying with the same company. So when it comes to debt, there's a bit of a ream out there, right? Most people don't actually have nice things. They actually just have debt. Got a nice house? Nope. Not for another 332 months because you got a mortgage. Oh, what a cool car. It's a loan. Debt's based upon money that you'll make later. And who's ever been good at taking care of it later? Later's when you're tired. Later's when you've had kids. Later's when you don't want to work anymore, and neither does your liver. What happens in Vegas stays on your credit card, and sometimes you're going to tell you. That's why they target young people. It's crazy that you can get a credit card before you can legally get drunk. Yeah, you can go into debt before you can go into a bar. I got suckered in at 18 years old by a hot girl giving out free T-shirts when you signed up for a card with 29% interest, which was 29% more interest than she had in me. Young people, they don't know. They think life will always be filled with energy and immediate recovery. But you only know that when you're older. That's why debt's something we sell to the young, like student loans, predatory mortgages, the Fire Festival. Young people don't know about the future pain. It's like when young people drink. They just keep going until they're wasted, throwing up on their Uber driver on the way home. Can you imagine knowing the pain of the hangover before you drank? It's the same with debt. Debt is money's hangover, or it's herpes, because there's not a quick cure. They call it MasterCard because as soon as you get one, you're their slave. You spend years paying off the credit card just to get your freedom. Hey, look, CNBC did a survey of 1,030-something-year-old millennials. 52% of them say their student loans weren't worth it. I think if you talk to one for 30 seconds, you'll probably agree. See, debt isn't the same for everyone. The government doesn't have enough money to pay their bills. They print more. When you do that, you get arrested. It's just too easy to buy things on credit. QVC figured that out a long time ago. QVC is kind of like porn for old people. You're up late at night, watching it. No one's around. You whip out your card, and the next thing you know, you got $200 worth of Snuggie blankets. When it's over, you feel guilty and ashamed because guess what? You already had Snuggie blankets. They're called blankets. See, consumer debt and leveraging loans to acquire assets are two very different things. So let's unveil the top 5 debt mistakes. The first mistake is people just don't know how to define debt. What do I mean by that? Well, let's look at a balance sheet. A balance sheet is just simply assets versus liabilities, right? So you got assets on one side, liabilities on the other. So when you have an asset like a house, let's say that your house is worth $500,000, but you owe $250,000 on it. Most people would say that's $250,000 of debt, but by a balance sheet, that's not the truth at all. By balance sheet, what you actually have is $250,000 of equity, because 500 minus 250 is still a positive $250,000. That's net worth or equity. So when we say we're $250,000 in debt, we're actually $250,000 in equity. The inverse would have to be true. So if I had a $250,000 home, it's 2008, and I owe $500,000 on it, then that's $250,000 of debt. Debt is a function of our liabilities versus our assets. So if you have more liabilities than assets, that's debt. This is why it's important to avoid consumer debt. Because consumer debt is we borrow and there's no asset attached to it. That's what people would call bad debt, but bad debt is just debt. Like if we owe more than we have. So you have to ask yourself, are you the kind of person that can use loans to acquire assets? Some people are. Some people are brilliant real estate investors. And what they could do is they could find the right deals and they might borrow to acquire that asset. But if they're creating more cash flow than what that loan requires, that's positive. Now, other people, they use that leverage and it eats them up because they don't have the right mental capital. It's not their investor DNA. And so they're chasing a return, not really knowing what to do with it. I know people that know how to do auctions with real estate or fractional ownership, or they have so many different ways that they could, maybe they're in a long-term lease and then it's not going well enough. So when that's over, they move it to Airbnb and they improve their cash flow. They're just people that are really good at real estate. Other people aren't good at it. So one economic turn or when there's turmoil or volatility, they are in trouble because they didn't have a backup plan or contingency or they're over leveraged. I got there in 2008. I thought I was so smart with real estate because I was just lucky early on. And I thought, well, if a little's good, a lot must be better. So I had over 100 properties and I had partners in some of them. I owned 20% to 100% of those properties. And some of my partners, they went bankrupt and I got to inherit that property. And now I had to figure out what to do with it, which took an exorbitant amount of time, energy, effort, money. And I was able to get past into the other side without going bankrupt, but it cost me millions of dollars because that was the ignorance tax. So you have to understand how you deal with loans. See, you either have efficient loans or inefficient loans. If we borrow to consume and go on a trip, we come back with the memories, but without an asset to create cash flow. So let's go to the next piece here, which is the cash flow index. Most people don't know their cash flow index, and so they get into trouble. So you can use a cash flow index. I guess I could just abbreviate here. Let's call it the CFI. It's just what's your loan balance divided by the payment. Okay? Now, if that's greater than 100, that is an efficient loan. Efficient. A very efficient loan. So might not be the best idea to pay it off because you might be able to create more cash flow. Now, if on the other hand, it's, let's say, less than 50, that's inefficient. It's very inefficient. And so you might want to do all you can to pay that off. But understanding your cash flow index gets you an understanding of which loans to address and attack first. Go with the one with the lowest cash flow index and pay extra there, pay the minimum to everything else. And other loans, if it's always a good cash flow index, you might say, hey, this is cash flowing. And maybe you got that money set aside somewhere else. Like I've got a mortgage right now on my home, but it's at 2.75%. And I've got enough money in my cash value, my life insurance to pay that off. But we don't because my cash value is earning like 5% because I have policies that are really old, like 25 years old. And so they're very efficient policies with plenty of cash value, but I can out earn it. And just think about this. If I was paying 2.5% to earn 5%, that's 100% markup. If I could buy something for $2.50 and I could sell it for $5, that's 100% markup. So I'm not going to lose this 100% spread by paying that off, especially because my wife feels comfortable as well and I could pay it off the next day. Now, I'm 46 years old. It's taken time to get there. I'm not saying this to brag because I just talked about how I was horrendous with a lot of my real estate investments back in 2008, which helped me to develop investor DNA and create the very things that we're talking about here. So it was a huge lesson that I wasn't a good investor in that way. It wasn't part of my investor DNA. I don't love real estate. Real estate's talking to property managers and maintenance people, and it's talking to attorneys and bankers. It just wasn't the most exciting thing for me. So I was doing it because I was chasing money and being greedy. And it wasn't aligned with who I was. So it was interrupting my Halloweens. We're on trick-or-treating. I'm dealing with tenants, and I'm holding a Super Bowl party, but I'm working on closing on a deal. It was always something like that. So that wasn't for me. When you know your cash flow index, then you can know whether you're comfortable. You have to look at the peace of mind index, or how do you feel about those loans? Because some people, like I have a really good friend, Rich, he sold 19 businesses. When he left corporate America and he was going to go start his first business, his wife said, "Can we just pay off our home?" He's like, "But it's like 3%. I can do better than that." She goes, "I just feel better." So he paid it off because there was a peace of mind factor with that. And that matters. Some people, it's their number one objective is, I just want to pay this off. That's fine. But I want to be really careful that you understand this concept right here. Method versus objective. Okay? The method is, how will you pay it off? The objective is that you want to pay it off. I know there's a lot of financial gurus out there that go, you should never have a loan. You should pay it off as soon as possible. And there's others like, you should always have a loan. It's cheap money. Well, I think personal finance is meant to be personal. What is it that you really want? And what is it your significant other wants? What's important to you? If the objective is to pay it off, it might not be the best idea to just give extra money to the bank, because now that's trapped in equity jail. And it might minimize some of your tax deductions, although those aren't as advantageous as they used to be. Or it might lock up money, and now if you have a cash flow crunch, it's tied up in your home and putting your home at risk. So we have to be careful with that, right? But the cash flow index can be really helpful at identifying what to do. Now, when do you refinance? That's the thing to consider here. Refinance. I remember my last home before the one we bought, I did refinance, and then we moved 13 months later. So that really wasn't worth it, because there's closing costs. There's the loan and origination fees, there's title costs, there's a whole bunch of myriad of factors to consider. Plus, there's all the time it takes to go through the refinance process. But if we look at, I'm going to bring up kind of the next point, which is cost of money, and understanding that with this point of refinancing. So cost of money is simply, we always pay interest. Whether you pay cash and you forfeit the right to earn interest, that's an opportunity cost, or whether you borrow and you pay interest. See, when we borrow, it's super easy to see. If I borrow money and I pay 5%, I can see what that 5% is. It shows up on a statement. If I use my cash to pay, I know I saved that, but I don't really see what I could have earned with that money. And it's not showing up on a statement. That's opportunity cost. It's an important factor to understand. So let me give an example. Imagine I'm willing to lend you money, but I'm not going to charge you any interest. How much would you want? Now, most of you greedy suckers said, as much as I'd give you. That's what I would say too. Because you can do better than 0%. Right now, you can put it in treasuries at 6%. That's pretty awesome. So yeah, that's a good thing, Now, how fast would you want to pay me back? Oh yeah, greedy again, as slow as possible, right? Because you know that you could do better. Now, if I move it to 1%, who's still taking that deal? I am. Because again, remember, my cash value, I've got some that are earning 5% plus. I know I could put it in there through paid up additions and do better. And that's fairly guaranteed. It's got a lot of safety with that. Now, if I'm going to take and speculate on some meme coin or some piece of crypto I know nothing about, that's extraordinarily dangerous. And we saw this in 2008. A lot of people were borrowing money from home lines of credit and putting it in the stock market. And then the stock market went down for a couple of years. And they still owed the money. That's the problem. See, a lot of people leverage without the knowledge, and that's really risky. But there's other people that are so dogmatic, like you should never borrow no matter what, and the borrower is a slave to the lender and all this kind of stuff. Like, we have to really consider, there's real estate investors, like when I was on with Kiyosaki, we did these interviews, and he talked about how he was refinancing back in 2017 all of his loans, and he was getting it to like 3%. There was so much more cash flow. He didn't want to pay it off because he had plenty of assets. Now, other people, they would lose sleep at night. They wouldn't stomach it, so you have to understand who you are. But cost of money is so helpful. Cost of money is your highest, best, sustainable rate of return, or the highest cost at which you've borrowed money. Some people are at 29% on their credit cards. That's a huge interest rate. Every time you spend $1 and don't pay that down, it's costing you $1.29. So that's a huge cost of money. Other people, Michael Saylor, who has one of the most impressive companies and he has the most money in Bitcoin of anyone, like every time he spends $1, it's costing him thousands of percent probably because of his opportunity cost. But there's also the quality of life factor that you have to look at. But opportunity cost is important when we're considering paying something off, because if I can get something at 1% and earn 2%, that's a nice spread. But on the other hand, for most people in the world that aren't savvy investors, that haven't figured their investor DNA, they're borrowing at a higher rate than they could earn. And you can see this when you walk into a bank. The bank will advertise on one side and say, hey, this is what we're charging for a car loan, 6%. Here's what we're paying on a CD, 3%. They're showing you. They've got a spread. It's like they've got renters. They're buying a property. They pay $3 and they're renting it out for $6. They're renting money. That's their game. So cost of money is important. Peace of mind is important in that factor as well. So you look at maybe refinancing. I have no problem in my world refinancing something into my mortgage. That's what I did with my previous home. I refinanced other loans, so all I had was one mortgage and no other loans. The reason is the interest rate on the mortgage was so low compared to any other loan that I had, and it lengthened it in an efficient way because I was earning more than I was paying. Other people going, I've just increased my debt load. I understand. You've increased the amount you owe on that specific asset, and for some people, that's against their objective. You've got to make this personal. What matters to you? So know your cost of money, and you're going to make better financial decisions. Now, cost of money takes into consideration, as I said, your peace of mind. Is it sustainable? Because maybe you can get a good return for a short period of time, but is that going to last? And the fifth thing with that is most people ignore the 4 C's that help them minimize cost. The first C is credit. And there's a few factors that make up your credit score. If you pay on time, obviously you know that, but there's hard versus soft inquiries. Hard inquiries where you have an institution looking to lend you money and they go look at your credit, that's a hard inquiry. If you have too many of those, it'll lower your credit score. Soft inquiries are you sign up for a service, you look at it, that doesn't impact it at all. Your kind of utilization rate. So let's say that I have a credit card at $10,000 and I've only used $2,000 of it. That's a good utilization rate. 20% or less isn't going to impact me. But if I get up to $7,000, it's a higher utilization rate. That could lower my credit score. And one of the major errors people have a lot of times is they don't report. When I say the institutions don't report how much is available credit. If it shows 0, but you actually have available credit, it's because they're not reporting your upper limits. So that could impact your credit score. So paying on time, your utilization rate, hard versus soft inquiries. Errors make up a big part of it. A lot of people just have errors. If you're a junior or a third or something like that, you've got the same name as family members. A lot of times their stuff will show up on your score. If you have the wrong address or a different name on one versus another, there's just a lot of small errors that are out there. Maybe you didn't, showing that you didn't pay something 10 years ago. You want to get a letter of deletion before you pay that off. But, just getting your credit score to 760 or higher, it'll give you access to almost anything. So that's one thing, is if you don't have the right credit score, you're going to pay higher interest rates, but you'll also potentially pay higher insurance rates. Car, homeowners insurance, they look at your credit score. The second C is collateral. If you have a mortgage on a home or a car loan, you're going to notice those are typically a lot lower interest rates unless you have some introductory rate with a credit card through a balance transfer or a same as cash when you're financing furniture or something like that. But long term, what you're going to find is collateral is going to lower the interest rate quite a bit. The next one is cash flow reporting. A lot of people just don't have their financial house in order. And so when they go to get a mortgage, it takes them so much work because they haven't done their taxes or they don't have income statements or balance sheets. And if you don't have that, especially as a business owner, that you're not W-2, it's going to be hard for you to get the best interest rates. And finally, the last C is connections. The right connections. I had someone that did a Cash Cabin 101 immersion with me. He owned an estate in, San Jose. That had a winery on it. Had a hard time financing it. Telling me found a specific Polish credit union that they love to finance those types of properties. Or had a chiropractor that was buying a practice and buying the actual building, and we were able to go from 6.5% to 4.17% simply by having an institution that's really good at financing those types of things. So these are important to the 4 C's: credit, cash flow reporting, collateral, and connections. So here's the deal. Never borrow money if it destroys and decimates your peace of mind. Leverage can be you leverage your mental and relationship capital, not just your financial capital. Like, this is mental capital for me, a book, right? I leverage it by writing it and putting it out there. There's ways that people get that with my Rich Life bundle, and they get my 3 most popular books. It's like the financial intelligence system so that I can help improve people's lives, and I love to write. Now, what's weird is some people on social media are like, oh, yeah, I bet you have a book to sell. Well, F me for writing a book. Like, how is that a problem? That's just crazy how some people, they're so jaded because I get there's a lot of shysters that are just like over-promising and under-delivering. I understand. But really, when it comes down to this, don't borrow for things that are speculative or you don't understand, because you end up with a loan and you don't end up having the asset. And never borrow to consume. If you borrow to consume, now that's where you're going to get into consumer loans that will show up as debt versus equity. So we always pay interest, but understanding what that means is big, because let's just say, for example, I can earn 5% or I can pay 5% if I borrow. And so I'm going to get a home. Whether I do a 30-year, whether I do a 15-year, or whether I pay cash, in reality, it's the same interest cost. Why? Because yes, a lower payment on the 30-year now, but then more interest that gets amortized. 30-year has less interest but a higher payment. And cash, I have no payment, but I forfeit the right to earn interest. And again, if I can earn 5 or pay 5, it's all the same in opportunity cost. So at 15 years, that higher payment, if I just took the difference between a 15 and a 30-year mortgage, if it was the exact same interest rate, and paid it like a 15-year, it would pay off in 15 years. It's hard to understand interest sometimes because it's the compounding effect. And so opportunity cost, once we have the eyes to see that, all of a sudden we can be more informed. We can make personal finance more personal. We can start to get past the misinformation and the spreading of fear that so many people do, that get people to not live their lives and not invest in themselves and not have a quality of life because they're always afraid. I can't live my life till I got the monkey off my back of my mortgage. And then once I pay off my mortgage, I hear people say stuff like, oh, once I pay off the mortgage, then I'm going to invest and my investments are going to blow up. And I'm like, well, if your investments are that good, you can pay off your mortgage faster with the investments. But again, we have to look at speculation and risk and those other factors. So when we look at loans, it's not good debt or bad debt. It's equity or debt. Are we creating equity or are we creating debt? It's either efficient or inefficient loans. And maybe we're leveraging the wrong things sometimes. So let's ask, what would money Jesus do? WWMJD, right? First off, there's no record of Jesus' life from age 12 to 30. And if no one knew what I did from my teenage years through my 30s, people might think I was a saint too, which I'm not. I'm Catholic, retired, but not super religious. So let's face it, that's kind of basically the same thing. And well, it may not be a sin to discuss money. It's definitely taboo, but why? Money isn't even real. It's a thing that we made up. This thing has a different picture, or this one has a different number, so it's worth enough to buy X number of these, but maybe worth more or less depending on the country or the day, or depending on how much is printed or added to a computer screen. It's crazy. And who decided this, by the way? Because it hasn't always been like this. People used to barter. 6 chickens for a goat? No? Okay, I'll give you one of my kids for that cow. Seems fair. Right? So what would money Jesus do? Well, automate savings. Automate your savings. Pay cash for consumer goods. Invest in yourself. Learn to differentiate your expenses. Like, what are destructive expenses? Get rid of those. Those lead to debt. What are productive expenses? Those lead to equity. Increase those. And change your relationship with money. Go ahead and put quiz when you DM me at Garrett B. Gunderson. Take your money persona quiz. Understand your shadow persona that holds you back and your winning persona, which moves beyond its isolation and scarcity into abundance. When you can heal your relationship with money, you can be more informed and make better choices. You can know what really creates lasting peace of mind. You can focus on what works for you. You can watch videos like this and consider the economics and not get stuck in dogmatic nature of someone that just has a strategy without considering you, the individual. What allows you to live the life you love? How do you create your best life? Don't confuse method with objective. Keep more control of your cash, maximize your tax deductions, improve your credit score, know your cost of money, and make these choices with peace of mind in consideration.